You are listening to the Enormocast.
Alex Honnold once said that being in Black Diamond's solution harness feels like home. And that's either a ringing endorsement from one of the best or a desperate cry for help. The royal we here at the Enormocast is just going to assume it's the former, because the latter is quite complicated. And besides, we climb in a solution too. Not a sport harness or a trad harness, it's the one harness that stays in my pack for everything, because it's comfy and svelte without all the extra muckety-muck. I mean, really, what's a full-strength haul loop actually for? Anyone? Neither Smoot or Holly can tell you why you'd ever want 2,000 pounds hanging off your ass while you're climbing. So feel like you're home in a cleanly designed, comfortable solution harness from Black Diamond. And check out all their soft goods at blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite retailer. Black Diamond, a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. Do you like compliments? Compliments are good, right? From the outright, straight-to-your-face statements of praise to the knowing look and slight chin jut from your favorite bro at the gym, compliments can turn your frown upside down in an instant. And hands down, of all the gear I peddle on the Enormocast, the item that receives the most out-of-the-blue compliments are the splitter hats from peterwgilroy.com. You know, the ones with the titanium plaques and badges. That's right, titanium on a hat. Peter started making these hats a few years ago and has kept the styles coming with designs inspired by the great mountain ranges of the world. So if you're one of those people with a head and who enjoys random praise from friends and strangers alike, go to peterwgilroy.com and check out the splitter hats and all the wearable art that Peter creates. Even better, receive a discount and help out the Enormocast by entering Enormo at checkout. That's peterwgilroy.com and enter Enormo at checkout.
Listen, where are you playing it at? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah, the big
place.
That side of town. That's a big place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats. We really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out. Bad weather. No, later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is June 11th. No, 10th. No, 20th. It is June 20th. Wait, it's not even June. Okay. Things are going great here this morning. Let's try this again, shall we? Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is May 20th, 2021, about 10:30 in the morning. And this is episode 220 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Alex Honnold. And why am I so giddy this morning? Well, guess what? Carbondale, Colorado lifted its mask mandate, and I got to climb in the climbing gym without a mask on. Do you remember that? Do you remember the mask not riding up on your face? Remember being able to breathe? That happened yesterday. Quite exhilarating, actually. So we're feeling pretty good over here in Carbondale, Colorado. The mask compliance up to this moment has been great in this town. Surrounding towns down the western slope, not so much. Not so much. And here's the thing. You go to a place, everybody's wearing their masks like they're supposed to. And, you know, aside from, you know, whether or not you're that concerned about COVID, it just feels good that everybody's respecting the people who work there. You know, and that there's not some weird, weird politics going on. You're just like, yeah, we all got our masks on. Cool, let's relax and check out this lettuce here, you know? See if it's wilted or not, and then go on about our business. that's all fallen by the wayside a little bit, and it looks like we're getting out of this pandemic thing. Are we out of the politics? No, we are not. Alas. But I'm also giddy because I got a podcast here with Alex Honnold, and I went on sort of a mission to find out, has fame changed Alex Honnold? And I've known Alex Honnold for a long time, actually. It's like a lot of these things. I've known these people. And I mentioned in here like 10 years ago, but I think I met Alex like 15 years ago, sometime in the aughts, in an old watering hole there in Moab called Eddie McStiff's. Is Eddie McStiff's still there? I don't even know, because actually Moab is become a hellscape, frankly. Have you guys been there this year? Yeah, it ain't pretty. I've been down there, but I try to stay off of Main Street. It's like New York City traffic down there. Anyway, Moab, you blew it. You blew it, you guys. Hotel chain developers are not your friends. They're not. They don't care about you. Anyhow, back to Alex Honnold. Yeah, ran into him in Eddie McStiff's, I think before he'd free soloed the Moonlight Buttress, which I think is the thing that really popped him onto our radar, even though it seems a little bit like ancient history. He was not drinking. He was not really even socializing. I think he was there with some friends, and Eddie McStiff's, especially upstairs back then, was sort of a big meeting place for the climbing community or the outdoor community in general, especially in the wintertime. I think it was winter. But yeah, he was out there knocking out cracks, and I remember him just sitting in a chair with a hoodie up. He's come a long way on that front, on the willingness to socialize, I think. So I've known Alex for a while, and he's been gracious enough to come on the podcast a few times, especially at key moments in his career. Last time was just after he had free soloed the Free Rider, and the movie wasn't out or anything. It had just kind of happened. He was still high as a kite when he came on, actually. I mean, on adrenaline, good vibes, not anything else. He's a clean living gentleman. So yeah, I am happy to report that it seems as though Alex Honnold is the same guy that we grew to know and love as a climber. Yeah, I just really enjoyed catching up with him, frankly. And I hope you guys do too. It's a little bit of an old-fashioned, really very conversational Enormocast. No real dark side to this one. Just a lot of fun. And also enjoy another vintage Alex Honnold commercial. I've used Alex Honnold in a lot of my commercials because he's sponsored by both of my sponsors. But I think he's a little unwitting to this. I don't know that he knows that I have a little fun with his reputation occasionally in my commercials. So no calls from his lawyers yet. All right, let's get to it. Hey folks, have you fiends seen the Don Waller free solo yet? Well, spoiler alert. The one thing all the principal climbers in those amazing films have in common, besides the bedhead and spectacular abs, are TC pros from Sportiva. That's right, those fellas trusted their dreams to the face and crack shoe designed by Caldwell himself to tackle the big stone all day, every day. And Tommy wants your dreams to come true too. So if you want to stick to rock like your elbows stick to the table at Golden Corral, and you want your toes to luxuriate inside cracks like it's their home.
That's your home! Are you too good for your home?
Then check out the TC Pros and all of Sportiva's great shoes at Sportiva.com or your favorite local shop. And yeah, TC stands for Tommy Caldwell. Am I the only one that took a while to figure that out?
We did one in your house or something, didn't we?
Way early. Yeah, like a couple years in, you were up for the 5-point.
So when we spoke in Lander, that was the second time I was on the Enormocast?
Yeah, that was the second time. Yeah,
oh, yeah, okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
classic.
Yeah. You don't even remember. Yeah, it was in my kitchen in this house I lived in. It was before I had a kid or any of that stuff.
No, I do remember. Didn't you have burritos for us or something?
Yeah, I think we
did. I faintly remember like a nice burrito.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I felt you were a little bit more on the wing back then, so I felt like I had to feed you.
Yeah, totally. No, next time I'll bring you a burrito.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Yeah. So that was the first one. And the second one, I actually looked it up. It was in July. I posted it anyway, July 25th of 2017, and we did it in Lander, so it would have been like the second weekend of July that we actually spoke. And it was only... I don't know, a few weeks after you had done your solo at El Cap, and you were basically, I kind of dipped in and listened to a few minutes of it, and you're like out of this world stoked still, actually.
I am classic. Yeah. Classic.
So
That's
it was like 7:30 in the morning too, and of course you were ready to go. But yeah, I just remember remarking even in the intro about how like visibly sort of amped you still were from it all.
That's funny. I should listen again. I bet that'd be enjoyable for me.
Yeah, if you like dip in anywhere in it, you'll get the vibe in a couple minutes. That's kind of all I did. And but yeah, and it was funny because and this is sort of like a good place to start is just the amount of changes that have come to your life since then is pretty wild. And the funny thing is of course you'd done El Cap, but the movie was nowhere to be seen yet. You couldn't really even talk about it, although you did, and I always wondered if you got in trouble for that. But the film wasn't out, and so it was still like a pretty, sort of climby story, even though, like, I remember the big thing was either you were going on Kimmel or you had been on Kimmel. Getting on Kimmel seemed like a big deal, and it's kind of funny to think about it now.
Yeah, it's fair to say that the whole Oscars tour sort of outdid the being on Kimmel experience.
Clearly, yeah. And even that, like, back, you had been on, like, Rogan that one time, and that seemed like a big deal, too. So all these sorts of things, like, are gradations of what's happened to you since. So, but anyway, welcome back, and I appreciate you taking the time to get on this thing. Once again, 3 years later.
It's
almost 4 years later. Yeah,
I appreciate you having me back. It's the Enormocast is still the height of climbing media. It's always an honor to make an appearance.
Quote. I just got an awesome pull quote.
Thanks. Yeah. Use it.
And the other thing is, I remember there was at some point we were bantering. There was some curiosity about your numbers compared to Tommy Caldwell's. So I went ahead and looked it up. And you are for your one episode anyway, the second one, you're beating him. His is out a little bit longer, but pretty darn close considering your level of fame compared to his now. So I think it's a tip of the hat to at least to Tommy keeping up.
Actually, it's really a tip of the hat to the type of people that listen to the Enormocast. It's like a relatively hardcore climbing audience where they don't really care about a movie tour. They're just like, it's the Tommy Caldwell. He's the man. I'm like,
right.
Yeah, I totally agree.
He's become this sort of like, I don't know, this deep ambassador to the sport. It's pretty wild. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit about just the changes to your life and a little bit about how you sort of have handled the last 4 years. And if you think about it, if it's changed you at all, and if it's changed the way you look at climbing.
Yeah, I don't know what this is going to be like. It's going to be like therapy. I just got to lay down here and we can just chat for hours about like, what does it all mean? Like, has it changed my relationship to climbing? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, this is a climbing podcast, so what I'd love you to do is relax and realize that you don't have to explain the difference between free climbing and free soloing is.
Honestly, I've done so many. I've done so many public appearances since then that it's impossible for me not to define free soloing anytime I talk about climbing now. I'm like, yeah, so that's the one where you don't use the rope to assist you in any way.
Right?
I'm like, yeah.
Our folks know what that's all about. So. But yeah, I mean, the changes have been fast and furious, and you live in Vegas now, and so talk a little bit about your relationship with climbing these days.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely in some ways there have been a lot of changes. In other ways, it's not that big a difference. I mean, I went sport climbing this morning. I had a work thing this afternoon, which like this kind of thing is really different. Like I was doing like a corporate speaking thing for Morgan Stanley this afternoon, which you're sort of like, like that's unusual. Like that's not standard for the climbing world, but it's kind of become more common post free solo film tour because so many companies want you to talk about lessons in leadership and things like that, and like managing risk and whatever else. But on the other hand, day-to-day life is pretty much the same. I mean, I snuck into Red Rock this morning to try a route that I seem to try every couple years and just fail on every couple years. It's like this Tommy Lawn route. It's really reachy and I just can't do it. And so I tried it a couple times this morning and it was pretty freaking cold and windy and it was kind of raining a tiny bit. Not really raining, but like it was just the clouds were moving so fast. It was like it was kind of heinous. And I was like, yep, still getting worked, still can't do the route. And then went and did a little work this afternoon. I'm just like, yeah, it's just normal day-to-day life,
And you call Vegas home permanently, yeah?
Yeah. My now wife and I just fully live here.
What was the idea behind moving there versus you were kind of based in Tahoe before, weren't you?
No, I was never really based in
still-
Tahoe. My family, like my grandfather, built a cabin in Tahoe
Okay.
in like the 40s. So I'd spent summers there growing up, and it was sort of like the family, like all my cousins and my family had spent time there. And so I was never based there, but I just kind of had a background of going there. But the thing is, Tahoe just isn't really a great permanent home for climbing, I don't think, because there just isn't that great at rock climbing. It's it's like a lovely place to be and a really nice place to recreate outdoors, but the actual rock climbing, I mean, Vegas, within a 2-hour drive of my home in Vegas are some of the hardest routes in the country. I mean, it's literally a lifetime of climbing that I'll never be able to do. Like Jumbo Love is an hour away. And like an hour the other direction, you have, other 9A to 9B type of routes and projects. And it's basically the hardest stuff in the country.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've embraced sport climbing quite a bit in the last few years.
A little bit, but no, I mean, actually this winter I was on a strict bouldering and soloing program where I was mostly bouldering and then going soloing on my rest days and stuff. So no, I've been mixing it up quite a bit. It's just there happens to be a lot of really good sport climbing around Vegas, so it's easy to sort of fall into that because it's such a nice day-to-day sort of climbing activity.
I know I did read at least at some point a couple years ago, you had sort of an open goal of climbing, I think it was 9A.
Yeah.
With sport climbing. Did you achieve that? I forget.
Yeah, I did a route that was supposedly 9A in the guide, but I think realistically it's probably 8C plus. So, it's probably 14C, but sometimes, though actually it's true that pretty much all of my first of the grades have been, in retrospect, incredibly easy. Because like my first 14A, actually my first 13D and 14A, I think were in Maple, and having gone back as more of an adult and repeated them, I'm sort of like, I think these are 13C. I'm sort of like, oh, well. Like I think the first 14A I did, I would call 13C in my journal now. But, I'm kind of like, you know what? But since then I've climbed, I don't know, like 100 other 514s or something. So it doesn't really matter.
That's just strategic, dude. You got to find the one,
Well, it wasn't even strategic at the time. Well, I
No.
think actually in some ways it's by definition the first one you do will often be easier just because you're able to do it sooner because it is easier. You know what I mean?
But yeah, I mean it's sort of this wild thing to contemplate, kind of, who you are as far as someone like myself who's followed media my whole life, at least what media was, 25 years ago, which was books and magazines. But, sort of this far and away thing that we've never kind of seen before. It's like you are kind of this climbing meme. And it's interesting that
I was like, how far I've fallen. I've become a climbing meme. I'm like,
I know,
oh,
but
no.
it's just kind of wild for me to contemplate. And I'm curious if you contemplate those sorts of things and or if you're just kind of pretty, focused on remaining sort of who you are and in touch with your roots and sort of what it's like to kind of manage it all.
In some ways, I think that my whole scene now just more resembles normal people who are really into rock climbing, but also have a job. You know what I mean? It's like I just have more time commitments. Like I do other things for work. I have obligations to like show up at things and speak or work or write things or whatever else. But the reality is that that's the experience that almost all climbers have. I mean, most of my friends are working professionals. There's like a nurse or a doctor or something who gets a certain number of days off each week and then goes as hard as they can when they have time to climb. And I still have more time than average to climb because I'm still climbing like 5 or 6 days a week. But I just have more extra things on the side to do. But,
Right.
that's fine, though. I mean, I'm totally into that because the thing is the whole dirtbag rock climber thing is great to a point. But, I don't want to be 65 and still living in a van and, unable to support my family and like struggling, basically. And the thing is,
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of examples of that from the last generation. I mean, you look at the Stone Masters and there are plenty of examples of folks who just didn't quite plan for later in their life that well and didn't really have much of a strategy. And, I totally respect like living in the moment, having a good time and chasing first ascents and doing all that. But at a certain point, you just can't do it forever, and I just don't think I'd want to. Like, I sometimes think about this. I mean, you just mentioned being in climbing media for 25 years. Like, I've also been climbing 25 years. And at this point, I've been a professional climber for sort of 14 maybe. And, I'm 35 and realistically, I'll likely be a professional climber into my 50s or something. So that means I'm less than halfway there. I'm kind of like, man, if I think about doing all the things that I've done again, just doubling the pace of and scale of rock climbing that I've done, it makes me kind of tired to think about, you know? I'm like, dude, I've done so much climbing in the last 14, 15 years. I'm like, if I had to do all of it again, I'm like, God damn, like that's a lot of climbing.
I mean, I guess that begs the question of how you do keep your motivation, you know, to stay fit and to have kind of big goals. I know you have one right now. What's sort of your deal there? Is that pretty organic? I mean, is it something that you have to dig for occasionally, or is it still just like a innate sort of desire to get out there and be a rock climber?
Yeah, I think occasionally you have to dig for it for sure, but overall, well, I think I always want to go climbing. Like I love going climbing. Like in my ideal world, I would have limitless new sport crags around me with like routes from 13A to 14A where I could just spend tons of time on sighting and just like play on new tufas every day. You know, sadly, Europe has been closed for a long time. And so I don't really have that available. But I mean, in terms of just having fun climbing, you know, I still love that just as much. I don't know. I mean, I guess part of it is that a lot of the obvious big goals at this point I've already done. And beyond that is just really hard. You know, it's like, some of the things that are left for me where I'm like, oh, that's, you know, an obvious challenge that I should maybe do. Like there's a reason I haven't done it. It's because it's either would take a tremendous amount of time or effort or it seems really scary or whatever else. You know, it's just, you know, I think about it and I'm like, man, you know, I could do that, but it represents months of work or something. You're kind of like, yeah, I probably will at some point in my life. But it's like, boy, it sounds like a lot of effort. I think the way to paraphrase that is that I've kind of picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit. Well, I mean, actually, you know, Tommy on the Dawn Wall is a good example. It's like, you know, I mean, he spent 7 years working on this sort of futuristic life project. And I'm kind of, you know, I'm at the point where if I want to do things that are really hard for me or really new, you know, I might wind up spending 7 years working on a futuristic life project. And I just don't know if I quite have the work ethic that Tommy does. You know, I'm like, man, like he's willing to just grind it out for 7 years. But I'm like, I think I'd rather go sport climbing.
The other kind of question I had with, you know, and we'll sort of move on from the kind of life you're leading, but what about the recognition thing? You know, before Free Solo, there was still tons of recognition kind of within, you know, the climbing world, right? It was like, okay, there's Alex Honnold among other climbers at the cliff, and you know, it probably had some level of kind of like, okay, that person recognizes me. That person, I mean, it happens to Enormocast too. Let me tell you, but only when I start talking, but. You know, but then it just went exponential, and I feel like, you know, with something as big as Free Solo the movie, you know, an Oscar-winning film, you know, the whole 9 yards, it's like all sorts of groups of people sort of wanted to kind of identify with you and associate with you and probably, hopefully, you know, get a pic or have a word with Alex Honnold. And I was just kind of curious, again, looking at some guy who got to just play around in Yosemite, living in his van, you know, to a level anonymous, to that kind of level. What has that been like to be someone who's like recognized on the streets? Because that's never happened to another rock climber. I can almost guarantee it.
No, I think it's probably happened to some. I mean, or at least in Europe, there's certainly a precedent because you look at somebody like Patrick Ellanger, who wound up being like a French national hero. I think that my whole scene
and the
post-Free
Switch
Solo,
Machine too.
Yeah, exactly. Uli or
yeah,
Reinhold Messner.
Sure.
I think Reinhold Messner was elected to European Parliament or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had to move into a castle though
to
get away from
no,
it.
Not just move in, but he made a castle that's a museum to his own legacy as a climber. You're like, dude, that's next level. Like when I open a castle museum about my own climbing, I'm like, that's pretty.
Then you're over.
Special. Yeah, then
well, because his castle versus the one you'd build in Vegas would be vastly different.
Yeah, his castle is a lot more stately than anything I could build in Vegas. But
it would be some sort of like hollow facsimile of a castle.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be down right next to the Luxor.
No, it'd be next to the Excalibur. You know, that's already a fake castle downtown. It's so cheesy. But no,
when you're 75.
I think
they'll be like, there's a Vegas residency we've been holding for you, Mr. Honnold.
No, I think your real question though is that, I mean, like you said, there's already a fair amount of recognition in the climbing world. So for me, it's kind of been this long, gradual transition, or it's like been sort of steadily scaling up. Because I actually remember the very first time anybody recognized me, and it was like years before any media. I was at an In-N-Out Burger in California. I still remember. That's back when I started meat, you know. And it was like kind of a long time ago. And this random guy in line was like, are you, you know, like, I don't know, he somehow knew something about climbing, you know, probably from some like early Real Rock film or something, maybe the Banff Film Festival. And and I was like, that's crazy, you know, like someone just, I don't know. And then from there, it's just steadily escalated. And so I think that yeah, I mean, certainly the Free Solo Film Tour has changed the scale of that kind of thing, but it's still just like more of the same in some way.
Has there been like crazy offers? Have you been offered like acting roles and things like that?
Not acting.
I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, not maybe even not serious, but like I can only imagine.
Well, if you've seen the film Free Solo, you know I'm the world's worst actor. So,
that doesn't matter. Honestly, has there been that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, all kinds of weird life experience stuff. I mean, you know, most notable of which is going to the Oscars and things like that. But but like going to the BAFTAs, you know, the British Academy Awards, you know, we met like Prince William and Princess Kate or whatever her name is. You know, you're like, it's crazy. You're
Kate
like,
Middleton. Yeah.
You're like shaking hands with royalty, and you're sort of like, like what an unusual path from living in the van and rock climbing too much. So last year, or a year and a half ago, but basically in the winter pre-COVID, I spoke at the Nobel Prize ceremony, not at the actual, basically surrounding the Nobel Prize Awards. They have like all kinds of events and panels and things. And so I spoke at the Nobel Prize. And so I went to the Nobel Prize dinner where they like award the Nobel laureates. And you wear this crazy like white tux with tails and the whole, I mean, it's totally insane. It's, you know, it's in Stockholm in the winter or whatever. I was like, what an unusual life experience. Like, why am I here? Don't know, but I'm giving a little talk and I'm enjoying the whole thing. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's been plenty of stuff like that.
Probably, you know, just taking it as it comes and being interested in what's going on around you.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. I mean, it's easy to have major imposter syndrome with that stuff because especially, say, at the Nobel Prize ceremony where everyone there is arguably, you know, a collection of the smartest people in the world. And I'm like, well, you know, I made it through 2 semesters of university before I went and lived in my van. But otherwise, I don't technically know anything about anything, though I like to read a lot. You know, you're kind of like, oh, man, like, what am I doing here? But
yeah,
you know, to some extent, though, you just show up and you talk about the things that you know well, and try to learn as much as you can and enjoy the experience and just see where it all goes.
Yeah, and I feel lucky that, like, you know, we still have something of a relationship where, you know, we sort of text occasionally, very very infrequently, but and you know, and I arranged this with you directly, but you must have sort of people sort of putting up a screen against, or not against, but sort of fielding all this stuff.
Yeah, well,
Nobel, you know, the Nobel committee's not just like, hey, texting you up like, yo, bro, you want to come to Sweden?
Though if the Nobel committee texted me directly, I would definitely just go immediately and be like, oh my God, they texted me. But yeah, it's still the most effective way for me to do anything is if someone just texts me, because as soon as I see it directly on my own phone, I'm like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Let's do it on Tuesday, you know?
Oh, cool.
Whereas I do have a team now. I have, you know, a manager and agent, things like that. And it does help me screen a lot of things, because so much of the stuff that gets thrown my way, like I personally wouldn't really know how to triage, you know, like I get a lot of random TV offers and things like that, where someone wants to like pitch a pilot to a network of like a certain type of climbing show. And I'm like, right. I have no idea how to vet the production company or the network, or, you know, it's like, I don't know anything about all that stuff. And realistically, I don't want to know that much about all that stuff. You know, it's like, I went through the whole Free Solo Film Tour sort of intentionally trying not to learn too much about the whole Hollywood PR scene, because I was like, I don't, you know, it's like my goal in life is to be as good of a climber as I can be. Like, I never want to work in Hollywood PR. Like, I think it's all, I don't want to say it's heinous, because, you know, I enjoyed working with all the folks we worked with, but it's like, it's its own world and not one that I necessarily want to be a part of. So, you know, you kind of have to focus on your strengths, or at least your passions to some extent. You know, stick to the things that you actually want to work on.
To me, it seems like, you know, what happened with Free Solo, the film, it was put into the hands of the sort of the best people possible, in that it wasn't some big kind of out of climbing production, but rather it was a climbing production that then sort of got picked up. And, you know, I can only imagine that working with Jimmy Chin and Shai Vassarelli was like a perfect way to kind of dip your toe into this whole other world. Totally.
And not just Jimmy and Shai, but then, you know, it's being financed by National Geographic, which has a strong history of working with, you know, sort of fringe exploratory sort of, you know, it's like, obviously a company like Nat Geo is comfortable taking a certain amount of risk in their productions and dealing with uncertain outcomes. Because I mean, throughout the filming of Free Solo, it's like, you know, nobody really knew if I was ever actually going to free solo El Cap. I mean, I certainly didn't. I knew I wanted to, but whether or not I actually could, sort of remained to be seen. And so to have a production company that's comfortable with those risks and then to be working with people who I feel comfortable with, it was all sort of the ideal team for that kind of film to come together.
Yeah, certainly. And it's like kind of a wild alternate, reality thought experiment to think about if you had free soloed El Cap the way you'd done so many of your other free solos, especially early on, where you just went and did it, and then kind of like let the information leak out into the climbing world versus, what you did do, which, on the show that you did with me previously, I remember you talking about the choice to allow these folks to film you, and then you even talked about some pressure to not let them down once the production got underway because they were your friends, and even the folks that hadn't previously been your friends had become your friends during this lead up to when you were going to do it. So it's just kind of wild to do that thought experiment about what would have happened if you had just done the normal thing.
In a lot of ways, that pressure of not wanting to let your friends down is kind of the whole point of having a film, or of bringing your friends in, is to have that accountability. In the same way that you tell your friends when you sign up for a marathon or something, you're like, I want my friends to hold me accountable, so I actually do this thing that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Because otherwise, with free soloing El Cap in particular, I'd thought about it for years and never done it because it's when you're keeping it totally secret, it's really easy to just keep punting, be like, this isn't the year. That seems a little scary. Right. But it's like, once you start to bring people into it, then you feel a little worse about punting, and you're like, all right, well, at least try. I'll put some work in. I can't give up without even trying. And so then, and that was kind of, that was a big part of bringing in the film team, is you're like, I wanted to do it, but I just needed some help. Basically, I needed like some extra oomph to like get it done.
Do you have sort of a mental strategy with that? Because lately you've been teasing sort of a Red Rocks link up solo. Our mutual friend, Andrew Bishrat, was involved in kind of some training for that. And, but do you have like a little bit of a calculation of like how much you tease to kind of keep yourself motivated, or is it just part of the deal now?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, in the past, I basically didn't tease anything, but I think a lot of that was my own limitation because it all felt so big and so scary and so like internally meaningful that I didn't want to talk about anything ahead of time because it just felt like too daunting, and I don't know, it felt like too much. And now I'm a little more open about it. I certainly talked to Sonny, my wife, about it more. I talked to, a few friends about various ideas and projects more, mostly because, if I learned anything from the whole El Cap, free solo film process, it's that sometimes, having a team or having folks around helps. It's like, it's helpful to bounce ideas off people and to hear, to get beta from people, and to have partners who are willing to check out sections of something with you. The Red Rock link up thing that you just sort of alluded to is a perfect example. I haven't been hiding that at all. I've been sort of playing with this traverse of the whole range, which is a super obvious thing, to traverse the whole Red Rock skyline. And a couple of people have done roughly that. There are a handful of like different ultra running link ups where you can tag a bunch of the different summits by running along the limestone crest behind. And then there have been a handful of big climbing link ups where people combine a bunch of the summits, but nobody's quite done the whole thing in like an obvious, natural way. And so for me, the challenge has been trying to find a reason or basically a way to traverse the range that makes sense, where you do as much climbing as possible and as many of the named summits as possible in a way that feels uncontrived, where it like makes sense to go up and over the climbing routes, because that's the most efficient way to navigate the terrain. So I spent quite a bit of time going in and out of the canyons trying to find efficient ways up and over things, where it like feels like a straight line, but you're still doing really good climbing, rather than just hiking around everything. But I've been pretty open about it because it's really freaking complicated. It's like, it's been really helpful to talk to people about it and to learn some beta and to like I found out about a handful of scrambling routes that I just didn't even know existed that wound up being pretty good direct descents off a couple of the summits. Basically a lot of people other than me have spent a ton of time in the canyons exploring, and, I may as well take advantage of their knowledge to make my project easier, basically.
And is that, as you've come into the Vegas scene, has that been an easy transition to a whole new climbing community? In a lot of ways, I feel like, and this, you may contradict this or may not, but at least within the climbing world, I feel like you're like as close to, universally loved as about any big name climber I've ever met. You know, maybe there's some detractors about your soloing. Oh, it's dangerous, and you know, you're promoting it and making all these other people try to free solo El Cap. But
yeah, there's a big line at the base. Every day there are people taking a number, you know, they're just waiting for their chance to solo El Cap.
Just waiting for their chance to whip off and do the next. But yeah, you know what I mean? There's that, but within like the hard, that's usually from the outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, has that been well received? Are you sort of like getting the beta you need and the appreciation you want?
The Vegas community, the Vegas climbing community that we're part of is incredible. I mean, basically they're all close personal friends. I mean, everybody we hang out with here is great. It's actually interesting. There's enough climbing around Vegas that it seems like there are actually a bunch of different climbing communities here.
Sure.
You know, there's some people who are into the high-end sport climbing. There's some people who only climb long, easy trad routes in the canyons. There's some people who only boulder. And, you know, there's good climbing here year-round depending on the elevation. So, I mean, people just kind of do their own program all year. Like, we routinely meet people at the crag. We're like, oh, cool, where are you from? And they're like, oh, we live in town. And you're like, really? I've never seen you before. Like, how long have you lived here? Like, where do you normally climb? You know, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, that happens here in Carbondale.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Carbondale only has like 1,000 people in it, doesn't it?
No, well, it's a few more than that if you take the whole valley. But point being, like, yeah, we're always just flabbergasted. Like, who was that?
Yeah, totally.
Like, where did they come from?
Carbondale
but again,
has
I'm
a population of 2,000 and they all climb 514. You're kind of like, really? There's another one?
Yeah, but I'm also a dad, you know, so I'm not exactly like tuned in. I climb with like 5 other old guys, and that's about it. I'm one of those people. So
well, that's kind of the thing here too, is you fall into your own little community where you climb with your 5 best friends in town who are on like similar programs than you. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, I climb with J-Star quite a bit, Jonathan Segrist, because he lives nearby, and you know, obviously we have similar, you know, we're like into the same things, and so you just wind up like climbing with your friends a bunch.
Yeah, no, that J-Star's just a great dude to hook into too, because he's just a sweet guy and an amazing climber.
Dude, so good. It's like I watched him climb this 515 thing at this new wall we put up last year, and it was kind of crazy because I mean, you know, I've climbed a long time and I've seen a lot of good climbers, but I don't know, it was like watching a whole different sport. Like, and it was interesting because I was working on like a 14B project that day, and a friend of mine who I was climbing with was working on a 14A. And then we were watching J-Star try this like 15A B type thing. I think he called it 15A, but I was like, I think it's harder, even though I haven't tried it and don't know anything about it. But I was like, dude, it looks impossible. And my point was that, you know, the 14As and Bs that we were trying like seemed kind of normal, where you're like, yeah, the holds are kind of small and it's kind of hard moves, but it's like, this is what climbing is kind of like. And then watching what he was doing, I was like, this isn't climbing. Like, this is totally insane. There weren't any holds. Like, I didn't know what he was holding on to. Like, the clipping positions were insane. The movement was insane. He was like glommed onto the wall with like crazy opposing heels and toes and like tricky little bicycles and these tiny little holds. Everything about it, I was like, this is so next level. It's just interesting to see that kind of thing in person, because I think for most of us as climbers, we hear and sort of read about hard climbing in media, and we're like, oh yeah, you know, it's like, it's just a bit harder. But then to see it in real life,
it's just a bit harder. Yeah, totally.
To see it in real life, you're like, that is, we're allowed to curse, right? Like,
oh, totally.
Yeah. I was like, that is fucked up. Like, that, it looks so hard.
We interviewed at the Run Out, the other podcast I've been doing with Andrew, Jonathan, and some people were like, well, what, you know? And I said, yeah, we're going to interview Jonathan. They're like, why are you going to interview him? Like, as in, like, has he done some latest thing or whatever? And I was like, no, we're just interviewing him because he's like basically like the best American rock climber out there.
When he joined 8A, like, I spent years telling him to join 8A, and he resisted. I think mostly because he was like shy about, you know, being compared globally like that. I think he just didn't want to be, you know, totally like stacked up against all the other climbers in the world. But when he finally joined, I think he was like number 1, or maybe he was like number 2 or 3 or something. But you're kind of like, oh, you didn't want to do this thing because you don't want to be ranked. But then when you finally do it, you're like one of the best in the world, and like by far the best sport climber in the US. You're kind of like, dude, you know, it's so next level.
Yeah. He's a first ascensionist too, which is like another thing that is a little bit of a rarity among like the hardest climbers, actually. There's someone that's going and bolting and doing the work too. So not
a total rarity, because I mean, obviously, like Chris Sharma's put up tons of hard routes, and like you know, Joe Kinder's put up tons of hard routes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the lot of the strongest dudes have to put up hard routes because
Sure,
there's
they have
nothing
to
for them
find
to do.
something they need to do. Yeah.
But I think what's different with J-Star is that he's willing to build trails and like put in work and like he's willing to develop whole crags and put in easy routes and stuff as well. You know, he's not just putting in futuristic projects. He's also just like filling in the wall with like, you know, here's a classic 13 minus and here's a couple great 511 warm-ups. And, you know, he's pretty good about like establishing new areas, not just bolting his own projects. Yeah, he's a man who's not afraid to hike really far and do hard work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we appreciate him. Actually, as long as we're talking about other climbers in your life or in your purview, what were your thoughts on Sean's back solo of the Fitz Traverse, having been the person who, one of the two people who pioneered that thing?
It's so amazing. It's incredible. I was on an expedition in Guyana climbing to Tepui, and I came out from the jungle and sort of like caught up on the news, you know, like got internet for the first time, and I saw that and was like, whoa, like that's something, you know, like I really missed something meaningful while I was away. So, no, I think soloing the reverse Fitz, it's just incredible. I mean, it's hard to totally compare to what Tommy and I did because conditions were totally different and the strategy was totally different and the routes are different because you're going the other direction. So, you know, he was climbing all the walls that we repelled and he was repelling the walls that we climbed. Sure. And so, I don't know, but then he was also doing it at the very end of a dry season, I think. I haven't talked to him about it, but I got the impression that the routes were really dry when he was doing them, whereas Tommy and I were doing them during the first weather window of that year, and so it meant that everything was super icy still, but we were climbing the sunny side, so what we were climbing was kind of okay, but the stuff we were rappelling was totally insane, like covered in ice and everything. It felt really extreme. Sure. So when we did it, it was hard to imagine even possibly climbing those walls because they looked so scary and covered in ice. But I think when Sean climbed them, you know, they were dry, so presumably it wasn't quite as heinous. But I don't know. I mean, to spend that much time by yourself just questing through the mountains like that, I mean, it must have been just an incredible experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an elevated thing what he did. It's pretty interesting to me to talk to someone like yourself who has a glimpse of what that's like. But expeditioning like that for however many days hasn't necessarily really ever been your thing in terms of soloing anyway. No,
not really. It's funny, actually. I was chatting with one of my friends about it, and I think that probably the key element of his success on the reverse Fitz was just going in there with sort of an open heart and no expectations and just adventuring for as long as he possibly could. And I was chatting with someone saying, I think that's kind of what I would need to bring to the Red Rock Traverse if I ever actually did it. You know, instead of focusing on like speed or time or like any kind of performance metric, just go into it as like, I'm about to spend a very long time adventuring through the desert and just see how it feels. You know, and just let the whole experience unfold, you know, because I think that's ultimately what he did. It's just like, I'll just keep going until I can't anymore. And he was just able to keep going the whole time.
It sounds like the Traverse you're talking about, or however you want to put it, the link up, it seems like a perfect project because it's there in your backyard and that very thing can happen and then you can go home and you can come back.
Well, and in some ways, actually, that's what happened with Sean on the Fitz Traverse too. I mean, he's been there the whole year. So it's like he's been able to do some of the sections and think about it a lot and piece it together. And I'm sure he's been hiking and looking at it a lot. So, I mean, it has kind of been his backyard for the last year. And I think that really helps with big things like that. Is like the more time you spend, the more familiar it all becomes, the less daunting it seems.
Yeah, and in fact, I talked to him, and it was very much that, like this little germ in his brain, and then, you know, by building up some experience in there that season, and you know, like a backcountry skier or somebody else, like looking at the conditions every day and understanding what changes and how it changes, and you know, how the mountains sort of act, added up to him making the attempt, and then, you know, getting an excellent weather window. And he was also very humble about what you said about having, you know, really excellent conditions and being able to you know, exploit those. But down really there, that's all part of the strategy. You know, that's all part of the game down there. It's part of the skill of being in those mountains, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy and I also got incredibly lucky with a long enough weather window that we were able to spend, you know, 5 days climbing across the range or whatever. No, I think that really speaks to Sean, you know, his personality. He's like, oh, you know, I just got lucky with conditions. And you're like, well, you also climbed all day by yourself up and down every spire. It's like totally insane.
For 6 days or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you climbed and then hauled and then cleaned
Right.
like every wall in Patagonia by yourself in a single push. You're like, yeah, I mean, I guess you got lucky with the weather, but it's also like a lifetime of skill that plays into that.
I mean, he's a special person. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure, yeah.
When he and Nico did the first ascent of the Secret Passage on El Cap, at the time I was climbing the Zodiac wall style in a failed free attempt, and it was funny because every time I looked over, they would be like a pitch or two higher with their portaledge set up, like playing their flute and like having a good time. And I basically never saw them try or toil in any way. And I was over on the Zodiac, like hauling and being like, oh, my back, and like the bags are tangled and the ropes are tangled. And, I'm yelling back and forth with my partner, like, what's up with the lead line? What's up with the, it's all kind of a junk show. And then you look over and then you're like, oh, two guys just like magically floated up another 200 feet. They're laying out there totally relaxed, playing their flutes, like having a nice time. I was like, what the fuck? Like, who are those guys? Like I didn't know them as well at the time. And I was like, man, they just made it all seem so effortless.
Yeah, they got some sort of just badass vibe, the two of them.
Yeah,
for sure.
They really do.
An outrageous amount of skill, and they also complement each other in this, I think, really fascinating way of, Nico's such this hotshot climber, and when it comes down to it, you kind of forget almost with the frickin' mandolin and the all the other things, like how like just excellent of a frickin' rock climber he is.
Dude, I was speaking of Nico and excellent rock climber, I was like chatting with him after one of their trips to Baffin, I think, and he was talking about putting up some big new free route on granite where he was like, oh, the crux pitch I worked on for 3 days, and at the time I called it 7C, so like 12D granite vertical, whatever. And then he was like, but then when I got home, I found that I was routinely on-sighting 8A plus of the same style. So like routinely on-sighting 13C like vertical, which I was like, first off, how sandbagged is his route? And then second off, I was like, how many people say that they routinely on-site 13C vert routes? I was like, geez. I was like, what the heck? And especially because he's not even considered like an elite sport climber, really. He's kind of known as an elite big wall climber, but you're like, man, if you're routinely on-sighting 13C vert, like that's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though. He's like, we forget, but he was,
for sure,
this incredibly elite competition climber and everything else. But then there's the damn mandolin.
I know.
So it's like you kind of have a tendency to forget.
yeah, it is crazy.
Yeah, you need to learn an instrument. That's how this is gonna go. Your El Cap ascents will be much better if you bring your accordion.
The two of them always make you feel so
jams out.
Those guys just make you feel so untalented. You're like, you guys are so good at so many things, and you make it all seem so easy. I'm like, why is it all so hard for me? You're like, man.
Are you able to talk at all about the trip down to the Tepuis?
Yeah, totally. I don't think anything. So it was technically for National Geographic, and it'll be an episode of Nat Geo Explorer. I think it comes out in the fall or something. But I don't think there's anything secret about it.
Sure.
It was a great trip. We climbed a new wall, had a nice time. It was cool.
Yeah, and you went down there. I actually just talked to Sinat.
Cool.
Actually, he's the last episode, reconnecting with him after years, because I climbed with him in Yosemite.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. Yeah. People still aid climbed.
I know, exactly.
Yeah, so he mentioned a little bit, mostly we were talking about his new book, but it sounded like a wild trip.
Yeah, it was definitely a wild trip. It was a full... there's like a ton to unpack in the trip. It's like, because technically there was the biology component with, we were with this renowned biologist, and then there's also the climbing the wall part. And then, for me personally, I just read a bunch of books also, because there's so much time in the hammock on the trip, because, it's the tropics, so it's dark at 6 p.m. and you're like, well, time to read another book. And actually, and part of it was because I was on the trip with Mark and Renan, both of whom I've traveled with a ton over the years. And for whatever reason on this trip, I was like, I just don't feel like hanging around the campfire and like hearing stories, I was like, I'm just going to put on noise canceling headphones and read my book. And I basically did that for the whole trip, and I wound up reading 8 books. It was like kind of classic. But I was like, it's kind of a good strategy because, it's like, it was super fun hanging out with them because, we've had a lot of great experiences over the years and like had cool trips and gone on good adventures. But at a certain point, you're like, you just don't need to hear the same story again, You're like, I'm just going to read this book.
So you talked a little bit earlier about, having agents or whatever to vet these oddball projects that get sent your way. What about your climbing projects in terms of, something like going on that trip or, participating in North Face trips or things like that? What do you sort of look for or screen as far as expedition styles? And maybe you haven't had to do that as much because of the pandemic recently.
A lot of that has just been limited.
what's in your head usually when you think about a trip like that?
Normally I think about the team and the objective and just, sort of an emotional component of like, am I excited about it? And so the thing with the Tepui trip in Guyana was that I've always wanted to climb a Tepui. I've never been in the jungle, or not really. And so it was cool to go to a totally new landscape. It's cool to climb sort of a unique geological feature. And then I knew the team was good because, I've climbed with Mark and Renan quite a bit in the past. And then also you always kind of mix in the reality of it too. Like, does it fit well with your schedule? Or like, what's the opportunity cost? And in this case, it's a pandemic. It's like, I'm not missing anything else. Like, I've had literally no trips in a year. And because this was put on by Nat Geo, they have like full producers, like fixers, sort of making it all happen, making sure that the travel is safe and that it's all according to the rules and that everything's fine. And so I was kind of like, man, if someone's willing to take me on a trip to somewhere I've always wanted to go with people that I'm psyched to climb with, it's like, that all sounds great. Like, I'm into that.
What was your interface with the jungle like? That's always usually a story that comes out of these trips as being, something that can be soul crushing or enlivening or what.
I found it slightly depressing and slightly dreary because you're just in like a hallway all the time. You just can't see anything. And I mean, I'm used to Vegas where you have these expansive views at all time and the mountains are surrounding you all the time. It's like really beautiful. Like you have a beautiful sunset every night. And in the jungle, it's like we walked for 10 days on the way in or something without ever seeing anything except for trees and canopy. And you're like, geez, it's kind of grim. But no, I was into it. Actually, I kind of thought that a lot of the jungle stories of crazy wildlife and like crushing bugs and all that was maybe a little bit overstated. But I think that was maybe because we were experiencing the dry season in a particular area. I was told by some folks on the trip that like if you're in the Amazon basin, we were in Guyana, so it's not technically the Amazon. If you're like in the Amazon during the wet season, it can be just soul crushing. But that's definitely not the experience we had. I found it all like relatively pleasant.
Yeah, because that's
relatively. I mean, then like
relatively.
Being in the mud kind of like wears you down. Being sort of dirty all the time, having nothing ever dry. Like I mentioned, my noise canceling headphones that I was listening to every night. My case started molding. Like it just like grew a full on mold colony on the soft case to my headphones, and I was like, oh man. But there's no way to dry it because it's just like humid all the time. So over the course of the trip, I just had like this whole colony like growing on my headphones, and I was like, well, I guess that's just the way it is here.
What's your sort of interface with filming now? I actually asked Mark the same kind of question about what his feelings about being filmed are, because it sort of it can sort of change things. Although you had a very unique experience with that on El Cap, with people trying to. I remember explaining to me how there was all this concern about not interfacing with you or trying to interface with you as little as possible,
or not compromising my experience too much. I mean, they definitely put a lot of effort into making sure I had a good experience on the actual climb.
Yeah. So how are your skills with that now? Is it sort of becoming natural? Because it seems like it's, you're going on trips where, you're not allowed to just disappear into a place and come back out anymore.
Well, I don't know. I mean, actually this Guyana trip is a perfect example of, I don't know if Mark talked about it, but on the trip, I mean, so we were filming for this TV episode, and, the story for the episode has to do with doing the first ascent and like getting up this unclimbed wall. But the reality of shooting a TV episode is that you have to fix lines and like spend more time, reshooting things and like dealing. It's just like more like it's not like you're just going to climb something alpine style because you can't shoot it at all. And which is totally fine. I'm fine with going slower on that kind of thing. But it meant that I had plenty of time to like clean the pitches and sort of prep them. And in the back of my mind, I was like, no one's ever free soloed at Tepui, and I was kind of like, oh, if it's possible, I may as well at least try, or at least like set myself up to give this an effort. And so while we were there, I managed to free solo the route we put up also, which was like a 6-pitch 12B or something, which was awesome. The climbing was incredible. The rock's incredible. It was this great experience. It was really freaking cool. Wasn't filmed at all for the TV thing because it doesn't really fit with the TV story. It's like one of those things where it's not, when you're shooting a story about doing a first ascent and working on conservation efforts and, like wildlife biology things, it doesn't really make sense to be like, and then this random dude just like climbed the thing again without a rope. But at the same time, as a climber, if I'm in a place and I have the opportunity to do something, meaningful for climbing, I'm like, of course I'm going to take advantage of that. And so, sure. I mean, I think that's kind of the thing with filming is you got to look at it as, I don't want to call it a job because that's slightly too cynical, but you're like, yeah, the reality is if you're filming something, it's going to be a slightly different experience, but that doesn't mean that you can't still have a good experience doing what you want to do as a climber.
That's awesome. I mean, are you breaking that right now? Have you told anybody else about this? Any other media about this free solo Tepui?
I don't know. I don't think I posted about it. I think Renan, I don't know if there were pictures or anything. Renan and I went back and filmed some of the pitches leading, like for the TV thing. And then he took a couple of pictures of me free soloing this basically at this one place. It was easy for us, like at this one anchor. The next pitch like traversed off the anchor and then went up a little bit. So it was like a really easy place to snap some pictures without having to actually rig very much, because we both could be hanging at the anchor together, and then I could just slip out of my harness, climb like 5 moves, get this rad photo on this arete, and then just climb back over to the anchor. And it was kind of like 5'11" terrain, but like crazy exposed and really, really cool. And so he shot a couple pictures just so that there'd be like a photo of me free soloing at Tepui. Because I felt like just for history's sake, like for the American Alpine Journal or something, it's just nice to have a photo of like, look, this thing got done. And it's a great route. It was really good climbing. Like I was saying, because we had a bunch of time to work on it, I like brushed all the holes and ticked a bunch of things, and it, when I climbed it, it felt incredible. It's like, because the rock is so good there, which is the whole point of climbing Tepuis, because the rock is incredible. Like when you get to the good stuff, it's really, really good. And so, yeah. Basically, I don't know if this is breaking or not, but it could be.
I don't really care that much, but it just would be cool.
I mean, yeah. You can claim it. I mean, I don't think.
Enormocast, big news.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Issue a press release, Enormocast, breaking the big stories. First Tepui free solo. I think
that's pretty sick.
The odds are that when
I pay attention, and I haven't heard about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, yeah, actually, that's true. Because I felt weird posting anything about it, because I don't know, I'd wait till the TV thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you said about it being a little bit outside of the purview of the trip. And,
yeah, exactly.
Trying to change focus or steal the spotlight kind of
thing.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, I don't want to take away from the focus on the fact that Bruce, the biologist, found, Oh, actually, I don't think we're allowed to break that either. That actually might matter more, because we'll just see. Who knows? I'm not claiming anything one way or another, but I think that maybe for Bruce it's important not to show images and things. I mean, I think that with science it's really important to follow the right protocol where you publish the peer-reviewed papers. It's a little different than climbing, where you just post an Instagram where you're like, oh, I did this thing. People are like, sweet, and then it's considered officially then it's considered official. I don't know, but what I mean,
I've been telling the stories that you actually, after our last interview, you got the 3rd degree from Jimmy Chin. Like, they had you in a chair with a big light on your face, and we're like, "What did you tell Kalous?"
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know.
So it's my pride and joy that I got you talking, and maybe said something that you weren't supposed to say. Yeah. But no, know. That guy Bruce sounds like a really interesting cat,
dude. What a character! I mean, he turned 80 on the trip. And
really?
Yeah, it's crazy. He's 80 years old, and he's still just trekking through the jungle looking for new species. It was totally amazing. And so passionate about it too. That's actually one of the things I thought was most fun about being on the trip with him, is he made me appreciate, biology in a way that I just have never really thought about, because he was so into it.
That's funny, because Sinat said the same thing about a previous trip with him, that it like changed. That's in the same way, it like changed his perspective on like what it meant to go on these trips, and versus like the passion that this guy had for biology.
Yeah, honestly, I think I had pretty much the same experience that Mark had on that previous trip, was that I came away from this thinking that if I ever do another Tepui expedition, I'm definitely going to bring a biologist or somebody along, because there's just such opportunity for furthering human knowledge in a way. And it's funny, because if you're doing a climbing expedition, it's not that much more of a hassle logistically to include rations for one more person. Like, if you're already doing all the logistics, like, what does it matter carrying food for one more person? But for a biologist to get the opportunity to stay in one of these places and do science, basically to like look around and look for new species, it's just like they just don't really get that opportunity normally, and there's no real funding for it. And so it can be this tremendous, boon for science, basically. I don't know. I was surprised by it, because you always think of scientists as like, oh, well, surely people have probably done all that before. But actually there's no real funding for it, like nobody's going to pay somebody to go out to the middle of nowhere and look for frogs, or at least, some people will, but it's hard to find the funding for it. And so I think if you're on a climbing trip, you should definitely at least consider, taking somebody with that kind of background. It's interesting too. I mean, I've read a bunch of sort of old climbing stories, and there's definitely a strong history of that kind of thing. Where like alpinists used to, take flower pressings and like all that kind of stuff. Like any kind of expedition also involved collecting samples and, writing up observations about geology and flora and fauna, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's kind of disappeared a little bit as climbing's become more of a sport. Now it's just like, oh, you want to go perform this athletic achievement, but nobody's really collecting flower clippings anymore.
Also, the history of it, especially with like, alpinism in Asia, the Karakoram and the Himalaya, was that, they were these expeditions into the unknown. So it's probably partially that, it's getting harder and harder to go into the unknown, go into these places like you went into to find sort of new ground in terms of biology or whatever.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting is that where we went isn't technically unknown. I mean, right. Where we went is the border of Guyana, Venezuela, and Brazil. And so, I mean, that region is relatively well documented because the border has been disputed for 150 years. Like people have argued about the lines on the map for a long time. And so people have gone there technically, but people just haven't really gone there with enough time and resource and energy to spend time looking for specific species of frog or specific, species of flower or whatever else. I don't know. I mean, I think that there are probably a lot more gaps in human knowledge than people might appreciate. And so,
Sure.
I think anytime you're going sort of toward the edges of the map, it's like worth considering what the gaps are.
Speaking of that, you're also now known for your foundation. And tell me a little bit about how that's grown, because you had it going before, the movie and everything that's come with it that we've talked about. But this must be just an incredible boost to the work that you ever did with that. I mean, in terms of being able to raise money, being able to raise awareness, being able to get other people on board.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk a little bit about how that's changed and what's going on with that.
No, it's been great. I mean, so when I started the foundation in 2012 or so, I was giving away about 50 grand of my own money a year through it. And that represented, like a third of my income at the time. And I was like, oh, this is, cool to do something useful with the money that, and I was living in the vans. It's like low overhead. It's all pretty chill. Oh, there's a car alarm outside my house. What the heck? It's like, who has a car alarm in the suburbs?
So it's part of the soundscape of the Enormocast. Engines, horns, whatever.
Totally.
Kids
sirens.
now.
Yeah, kids screaming in the background. I'm like, I wonder if you can hear that though. That's so scrappy.
You didn't listen to the Corey. Did you listen to the Corey Rich episode?
No. What happened?
Oh, you got to go back and listen to it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You made an appearance.
Oh, cool. Did I wander in chatting or something?
No.
Okay. Well, so what I was saying with the foundation was that, last year we gave away over $1 million in grants, basically. And so to see it, basically have 20 times the impact from where it started is pretty satisfying, because it started as just me wanting to do something useful in the world. It was like, I just felt an obligation to try to do something. And to see that just have such a bigger impact as a result of things like Free Solo and sort of broader public support. I mean, it's pretty satisfying to know that many more projects are being funded in the world. It's
something I thought of right away, when that kind of whirlwind started to begin. And, I talked to Mikey Schaefer like early on when there was just kind of rumors. He kind of previewed that there were rumors that it was going to be nominated, and I flat out on record was like, well, it's going to win, dude. And so and getting it nominated, and then it was that the night of, and I was really confident that it was going to win. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but you can be humble and not
actually
express your opinion.
By the time it was a finalist or shortlist or whatever it is, I felt like it was 50-50, but that's partially because a bunch of the other favorites didn't get nominated. So like in the early phase, it was like, who knows, it's a wide open field, and the whole selection process is a little more opaque than people might think. It's all sort of crazy with like who's seen the film, who votes, like all kinds of stuff. But by the time the night of the actual Academy Awards, I was kind of like a solid 50-50 that it was going to win. I was like, well,
feeling pretty good.
Well, I was kind of neutral, but I was like, yeah, there's a pretty good chance this could happen. This is crazy.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It had just come out of IMAX. It was definitely like kind of riding a high, I think the whole PR tour went really well. It was well executed, whereas like there was all the right buzz around it at the right time.
What I was actually getting to was that like I was thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, well, compared to what he was doing before, like, Alex is going to be set, fairly financially, but I quickly leaped to the foundation, because a lot of raising money for something like that just has everything to do with name recognition and everything to do with being able to get into a room with people that have an interest and have money to put towards something, and all of a sudden that became a pretty big opportunity for you.
And honestly, a big part of the reason that I've done public things like Free Solo is because it's good for the foundation. It's like, because the reality is that the big public appearances and media things don't make my personal life any better. It's like my, it's not like I need to be recognized on the street more. It's not like that's making my life better. And, in terms of my day to day of like going climbing, working on sport projects, hanging out with my wife, like that's all pretty good either way. Like I don't need to do more media for that. But when I do more media, it does wind up funneling into the foundation, and that does wind up having a positive impact on the world. And that's pretty satisfying. And the actual act of doing the media, like a lot of the random things that come my way are fun to do, but there's no real need to do them for myself, because it's not going to change my quality of life. But it's nice when I can do something fun and interesting, kind of new, and know that it's going to have a positive impact on the world through the work that the foundation does. And so, I don't know, it's interesting. I was just doing this other talk where someone was talking about inspirations, and I was talking about Peter Croft. And it's interesting because he's taken a really different approach toward being a professional climber. He's always kind of stayed away from the spotlight more and like done less media, fewer public appearances, fewer film projects, things like that. And he's always sort of focused more on his own personal experience of going climbing and doing what he wants as a climber, which I totally respect. And one of the things I really admire about Peter is how he's maintained like a pure joy and love of climbing, for freaking 50 years or whatever. It's like he's been climbing a really long time, and he still just loves it as if he's a child. It's like he's incredibly inspiring as a climber, but he definitely chose a fully different track. And I mean, sort of early on, I sort of strategically chose to just embrace the whole public persona media side of it, because I'm like, you know what? I mean, you can harness that to do something useful in the world through the work that the foundation does. I'm like, at least, I'm having a positive impact, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, and it's felt really good with the way Peter's gone about it. It's like, I don't know, it just fits who he is.
Yeah, that's the thing. Totally, that's Peter, and that's what he's into, and I totally respect that. But I just. But
there's other times when I find that like some climbers who are actively kind of like crusty about it all, or like that's their whole party line about how they have to do these things, or it's just like it doesn't sit well with me. It's like, and I appreciate the fact that you just tore it off and said, all right, this is what my life's going to be like, and it sort of I feel like it sort of fits you in that way, the way it fits Peter to not do that sort of stuff.
Totally. I mean, that's the thing, is I feel like we both have made choices and we're very happy with our choices. You know what I mean? And I know there are definitely examples of professional climbers who didn't necessarily choose, they just feel like they got sucked into something and they're like, I don't know, it feels like a lot of pressure and I'm stressed and it's not great. But I was kind of like, you know what? I love climbing, and the work that you do as a professional climber, meaning like talking about climbing and writing about it and, like doing film projects, I don't mind doing that stuff. I think it's all fun. And I certainly don't have any skills to do anything better with my life. It's like I don't know how to do anything else. I don't, it's not like I know how to write code or something. So I mean, there's something to be said for making a living in a way that's relatively easy for me and is fun and satisfying, and it still allows me to climb as much as I want. I kind of chose. I was like, yeah, I'm just embracing it. I'm doing this, and this is great. I'm into it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show again, because I've been, it's like I said when we started, it's been 4 years almost since you were on the show, and so much has changed. And it's like I know you to a certain extent, but I just get to see you like everybody else through media, and it's been kind of curious about, when it started to blow up, it's like, well, is he going to change? Is there going to be sort of this weird rock star thing that's going to happen to him? I mean, he's literally hanging out with rock stars, which makes the climbing community kind of groan a little bit, as you probably know. But it's fun to talk to you, and I think hearing through your voice right now, it's like you're maybe not the guy I met at Eddie McStiff's in Moab like 10 years ago, but you're definitely still the guy I talked to about 4 years ago, which is refreshing, and I appreciate it. And I think you have the skills to keep all that stuff in perspective.
The thing for me that I always come back to is that the thing about being a professional climber is that ultimately you have to send. It's like it's always about climbing hard things. That to me is the role of a professional climber, is to do new things in climbing. And I think as long as you hold on to that, is like, I have to do hard things. It's like you can't stray too far.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, but you're if you said you're going to be a professional climber till you're 50, in your 50s at least. Let me tell you, there may be a point where you're like, well, maybe I'm going to have to take it down a notch, but that's a whole nother conversation.
No, but look at somebody like Conrad. I mean, Conrad's definitely taking it down a few notches, but he's still contributing to climbing in a pretty serious way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that,
I think sending can be probably interpreted a bunch of different ways.
Well, like sending to me is like doing new things, like developing a new crag, or like coming up with good ideas or even, encouraging younger and stronger climbers to do really good ideas. You know what I mean? But as long as you're still contributing to the sport, I think that's useful.
So one of the reasons we ended up doing this, or at least I proposed it to you, although I think you would have done it. I appreciate that you probably would have done it anyway, is that you've got this climbing podcast out that you're part of. So I want to talk for a few minutes about that. It's been funny being kind of one of the sort of players in the climbing podcast market. I of course heard about it before it ever came out, that jokingly, Alex Honnold was coming to crush me, to crush the Enormocast and, throw its ragdoll podcast out the window. But yeah, tell me a little bit about how you got involved in climbing gold and why you felt like it was time to contribute to something like that.
Yeah, so I'm doing climbing gold with Fitz Cahal from Duct Tape Than Beer, and Fitz and I had talked about it. He does the Dirtbag Diaries and whatever, and so Fitz and I had talked about it as sort of a podcast leading up to the Olympics. It's just like a limited series leading up to the Olympics, which is supposed to be last summer, but obviously pushed because of the pandemic. But we both felt like there's a real moment in climbing right now where the sport is experiencing tremendous growth. I mean, just the fact that I just called it a sport represents a huge change in what climbing has been over the last 50 years, let's say. Because if you'd ask somebody 25 years ago, they wouldn't call it a sport. They'd be like, oh, this is a vocation or like a lifestyle or an art or whatever else, you know what I mean? But it was much more of an adventure. And, now for somebody like me who grew up in a gym, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a sport. You train, you execute, it's just like gymnastics, but more fun. But right, not exactly, but I'm being facetious, but that's kind of what we're exploring through Climbing Gold, is that whole transition from pure adventure to a much more athletic sport now. And part of it happened because I'm supposed to be doing commentary for the Olympics this summer, though we'll see what form that winds up taking, because Japan may or may not allow anybody. I mean, they may just cancel the games entirely, We'll see what happens with the Olympics. But in theory, in a non-pandemic world, I would be there doing commentary with the Olympics this summer. And so I felt like doing a podcast was a great way for me to sort of practice my skills a little bit, because I'm not a great speaker. And I was like, oh, Jesus. But also a good way to interview a lot of the competitors. And I mean, even just learning background on a lot of the competitors, because like, man, if I'm doing Olympic commentary, I better learn how to say everybody's names right. I better learn, basic backgrounds like ages and skill sets and, competition histories. And I figured the podcast would be a great way to do that. But then because the Olympics got pushed, we wound up deciding to just do sort of a deeper background on what has led climbing into the Olympics. And so if you've heard any of our first episodes, we've sort of started. And the other key thing about Climbing Gold is that it's totally different than other podcasts, because we've actually rallied sponsors. And so we've hired, sound mixer and sound editor and more. Basically, there's way more post-production. So the interviews are much more edited. And the whole point is to kind of extract great stories and sort of speak to specific themes. So like with the Enormocast, you just have interesting folks and then just have long conversations with them, which I think is awesome. And it's a really good way to get to know somebody. But what we're trying to create is a much more thematic, like, here's what first ascents are, like, here's what bouldering is, and here's where bouldering came from, and here's how that has helped craft the direction of climbing, or sort of shape the direction of climbing. So I don't know. So that's basically what Climbing Gold is all about. I mean, the hope is that when it's all said and done, it's supposed to be 20 episodes, and hopefully it'll be a resource for anybody who's even remotely interested in climbing. I mean, it's not made for hardcore climbers, though hopefully there's enough interesting material in there that even the most hardcore climber can enjoy it. But it's more for people who have just gotten into climbing, who are interested, who are, curious where climbing has come from. This is a bit of a long rant, but part of this is because I do a lot of events at gyms, and it's interesting because most climbers that I meet now have started climbing, say 3 years ago, and they started in the gym, they do a lot of bouldering. And I think that's great because that's the same way that I started climbing. I don't have any problem with starting in the gym. Or maybe it's just that I feel like a lot of climbing history is slowly being left behind because I meet a lot of people at events who are like, oh, Chris Sharma, is that guy like that Spanish dude that screams? And you're sort of like, oh man, you're like, it's the Chris Sharma, have some respect.
No, they don't say that, really,
dude. Well, I mean, the thing is that I bet if you took a average of all people who rock climb in the U.S. right now, I bet the mean time climbing it probably is 2 or 3 years. Just because the sport's been growing so quickly. And so I think that you just wind up losing a lot of cultural knowledge, and especially because so many climbing stories are sort of oral history. It's like things that you hear around the campfire. I remember being a kid and hearing all the Stonemaster stories, John Yablonsky doing all these crazy things in Joshua Tree. And those types of stories, some of them are recorded in some old writings, but not that many. A lot of that is just word of mouth type of things. And it's good to save some of the outrageous stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a mission of mine as well. I don't pursue what's going to be sort of popular or news or whatever at the time. Okay, this happened, I got to get that person on the show. I mean, that's a little more what we do at the Run Out. But here I'm just I want to catch and capture some of these people. In my case, when I'm going deep, it's literally before they pass, before they're gone.
Totally.
And capture that. And like you said, to have it as sort of posterity, to be there. I agree that, what we do are very different things. And, it's kind of two pretty common podcast forms, what we both do. What I call sort of the curated interview is kind of what you guys are doing. And what I'm doing, I, openly have ripped it off of people before me. But also, personally, I feel like it's a great contribution.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is a one-man band where it's you're doing all the work, and whereas Climbing Gold has a team, and so it's way more produced and just way more put together as a final product. Sure. I kind of think that Climbing Gold will wind up being a big benefit to climbing podcasts overall because I've been doing a bunch of PR stuff around Climbing Gold, and it's all been on sort of mainstream sports podcasts and things. And I really think that it's going to bring a lot of people into climbing podcasts more generally and help educate a lot of people about what climbing is and where it's come from and where it's going, which is kind of the whole point. And I think from there, they branch out into the more niche, things like the Enormocast, the Run Out, or what's the power company one called? Or is it just the,
I think it's Power Company.
Yeah, whatever that podcast, which
and the Nugget too. Another guy, Steven Dimmitt's doing the Nugget, which is a whole nother interview one as well.
Yeah, I mean, but those all have more niche focuses where it's this is purely on training. The Power Company one is whole episodes on what protocol you should use for hangboarding, and you're just kind of man, to the average non-climber, they'd be WTF, what are they talking about?
Exactly.
It's so I mean, I think that Climbing Gold is sort of contributing a different thing to the climbing podcast space, and hopefully it'll be a resource for the casual interested person who sees climbing in the Olympics and they're like, that's cool, I wonder what that's all about, which is just totally different than what's out there right now.
Yeah, and then the little gateway drug, and then they'll come over to the Enormocast for the real stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
For the real deep dive into what the hell climbing is.
They'll be they really went deep. It was so interesting.
But I mean, I've been jealous. I've been jealous. I think you guys have 4 or 5 episodes out, and you've already nailed some guests that I was just ugh. I mean, Joanne Uriosti, Joanna, or is it Joanne?
Yeah, Joanne.
Yeah, Joanne.
She's
she was
so
someone
amazing.
Yeah, I know, and she was someone I tried to get on the show way early on. I was out in Red Rock, the Rendezvous, and some friends of hers were like, "You got to have her on." I'm like, "Dude, I will, 100,000%." But she demurred, and it was a time when no one even knew what a podcast was.
Totally,
really.
Dude, you should try again because she was great. I mean, I think she's totally open to doing a good interview.
Oh, I loved your interview, and it was such a great story. The whole
I know.
getting
That's
George
crazy.
out of the freaking
The priesthood.
The priesthood. It was like a tight.
That's crazy.
That was an awesome part of the interview. I was smiling through the whole thing, and texted Fitz and said touche.
Yeah, it's wild.
Getting her to go, and he said she it was a little bit of a hard sell, but they took care of it. So and
I think she
you
was
had
nervous
Gil on
about
the
it.
most recent one. Yeah, but she doesn't. She comes across so confident and great.
No, she was incredible. I mean, and the fact that she's put up all the classic routes in Red Rock, and yet nobody really knows about it. It's just so,
essentially,
it's so amazing.
Yeah, totally.
But the John Gill one, I don't know if you heard, we released this little thing that we called a bit of gold, but basically a little bonus episode, which in some ways is a good way of sharing extra cool stories. And I think it's also a way to allow Fitz to have an extra week to edit like other episodes, because he's like frantically working to like crank these out. But the bit of gold with Gil was like this amazing story of his first time climbing outside, which was just this totally outrageous anecdote that didn't totally fit into the episode because, like I said, it's all sort of curated thematic around bouldering. But the story was just so good where like it needs some home, And so we're trying to sort of extract a bunch of those little stories and like save them in their own ways, because they're just such good anecdotes, And John Gill, I think, is 80 maybe or pushing 80. And so, it's like it's good to save those kinds of stories when you can.
Well, it's made me feel lazy because I've sort of slept on a lot of these guys, and obviously, folks have hit me up about Gil. I've been in contact with Sherman and tried to get it done, and it hasn't really happened. And but yeah, it's like I kind of had all the time in the world, and then all of a sudden you guys roll and you're like, here's John Gill. I'm like, shit.
But again, this is the difference between having a producer and things, because in this case we have Lisa Hedrick, who's sending emails and like dealing, because if I had to personally reach out to all these people, it just wouldn't happen, because I'd be too busy going sport climbing in the morning, and then I'd be like, well, I'm pretty tired now. I was like, I don't really want to write a bunch of emails, so it's like that to me is the difference between having like a team working on a podcast versus an individual.
Totally. Yeah. And I actually was really I didn't get jealous until episode 2. Because I think actually I have a really awesome and people love my interview with Peter, and that actually also happened out at Red Rock, and was kind of funny because it was also before there was a podcast was a thing, and I don't really think he knew who I was or why it was happening, but like I had sort of hounded him, and he is a sponsor. He was and is a sponsored athlete, so he probably was like, "Fine, I should do this." So
totally,
But I got him to turn the TV off in his room, and I literally could like see him kind of like come alive and go like, "Oh, this guy kind of knows what he's talking about. This isn't just like garbage, like mainstream media kind of like, oh, tell me about what it's like to be scared on a free solo kind of thing." I sort of felt it turn like right in the middle of it, and him kind of come alive, and all of a sudden I saw that person you were talking about, that like kid, lit up in his eyes, and like, oh, we're really going to talk about climbing.
Yeah,
for real.
That's what's so great about Peter, is that given the opportunity, he'll always turn on and be like, climbing, let's do it. It's like, yeah, totally. Yeah, Peter's just still has so much enthusiasm for it that it's like always a pleasure to talk to Peter about climbing, basically.
Yeah, for sure, always a pleasure. So, well, listen, man, I've used up quite a bit of your time, and I appreciate you coming on, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Well, I mean, let's give it another couple years and we'll see my next Enormocast appearance. It's so exciting.
Yeah. We'll see if we can, I'll let you know how your numbers turn out on this one.
Well, if they're not good, you have to have me back on immediately. I'll give more salacious stories, and I'll tell, it'll be like a tell-all about, who knows what.
That's what we need. I mean, you're playing in like Hollywood now. Like we got to get some dirt out of that whole scene. We didn't even talk about that. Like, did you ever, you went on Rogan again recently. Did he invite you to another MMA fight or what?
No. Well, now he lives in Austin. His scene's all a little different. I was in Austin with him.
Oh, right.
But no, actually, I feel like the Rogan experience has gotten more pro and like more chill. Because the first time I did, I was like, whoa, this is kind of crazy and a bit too much. And I think part of that is me growing up and being a little more media savvy, and then part of that is him probably doing the same. But no, this time actually it was kind of fun to chat with him. I was like, this is a fun interview, it's like really interesting.
Well, I mean, you guys like enter the room a little bit more on, at least media wise, on equal footing.
Yeah, totally.
You know,
well, also the first time here's a Enormocast expose, but the first time I did it, I showed up in some. So I've done Rogan 3 times now, and each time was in a different studio because he's moved around a bit. And the first time was just like some random unmarked building where I was like, it feels all industrial. It's just like some random door in the side of a warehouse, and you're like, where is this? And then I got in, and they like closed the door, and there's a whole team. It's like, you know, the sound dudes, like who knows who they all were. It's like his entourage, and a bunch of dudes smoked a bunch. Basically, they closed the door. There are no windows. There's no timepiece. A bunch of dudes smoke a bunch of weed, and then just turn on the mics, and it's like, here we go. And I was like, oh my God, like, you know, I'm like locked in a cell with a bunch of dudes who are stoned, and then you just talk for hours. But with no timepiece, you like have no idea like how long, you know, you're just chatting, and you're like, this is so crazy. And at the time I had done basically no media, so I was like, this is totally insane, you know. And then each time since then, like, I've become a little more savvy, and his scene has changed quite a bit. And so, you know, he's a lot more pro. And
it's $100 million scene now.
Dude, I know, it's hard to imagine, huh?
It's hard to imagine. Do you regret not going to that MMA fight? Because I know you went off to like Trono Blanco.
Yeah, I think I went to
like
Mexico
instead.
No, I don't regret that at all. Okay. I did a new read on a rad wall. I'm like, who cares about some random MMA fight?
All right, good for you. Yeah. Good for you. Have you ever thought about doing Twite's podcast?
No, he's never hit me up. I would love to, because I don't know him, and I've never like met him or chatted with him, but I have tons of respect for his writing and his climbing and just his whole scene. I'd be so interested to hear just his whole approach. You know, I mean, like, what a character.
Yeah, dude, I think that would be a really cool thing, because, you know, when I interviewed him, it was like this immersive experience that was really fascinating. And he kind of does I think they do the kind of Rogan thing of like, let's just roll. I don't think they're weed smokers, but I certainly drank a lot when I interviewed him. So, but yeah, I feel like maybe he could, you know, you guys could really meet on some level that might be really fascinating.
Yeah, he's also like personally dabbled in all the Hollywood stuff too, hasn't he? I mean, he's had a whole interesting arc through his own climbing.
Yeah, for sure. He's trained
the 300 guys and stuff, right? And a bunch
of and Superman, and I think he's trained Aquaman too.
Oh yeah, he trained Jason Momoa.
Yeah, I think so.
No shit.
So
I'm like, I trained,
he's kind of in that scene.
I trained Jason Momoa for about 45 minutes in the gym once, and I was like, yeah, you're really strong. Dude, I climbed to the gym with him, and he was telling this story about wrestling a bear for this like shoot that he was doing, where it was like a full. I mean, you know, obviously it's like a tame, you know, whatever trained bear. But he said that it's still really hard because the thing weighs, I don't know, like 600 pounds or something. So when it leans on you, it's like a tremendous amount of effort to not get crushed. And so, you know, he was basically like shooting this bear wrestling scene over and over. And he's like, yeah, sure, it's hard to hold that bear up. And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, who is this? And then I belayed him. And it's really scary to belay. Even belaying him with the Grieger, I was holding it like an ATC, because I was like, who knows what's going to happen when a 250-pound man falls off the top of this wall. I was like, this is so scary.
When I worked in LA, I worked in a gym in LA, West LA, the Recreation there. There was this cat there that was one of these former strongest men in the world dudes.
Whoa.
And he literally had lifted this rock in Scotland that hadn't been lifted in like 200 years or whatever, because, you know, they've been doing like log throwing and rock lifting there for, you know, since like Shakespeare. And he had lifted this rock like that. The locals just like went crazy. And it was the same thing. Like when he would take a whipper, it was just like the whole building felt like it would fucking shake. And like those whole shitty gym ropes, you're just like, oh my God, this thing is going to snap.
Totally.
So yes, a similar sort of thing.
Like anything could happen.
What was his name? It was Tom something, but sweetest guy in the world too, though, this dude. And he was like, oh man, I'm way lighter than I used to be.
Dude.
Because he was sort of retired, but.
Good thing, or you would have ripped the whole, especially because Recreation, such an old gym, you could have ripped the whole wall down.
Totally. I mean, exactly. Right. I mean, nowadays, but yeah, so, but yeah, if you, next time you see Momoa, tell him what you told me when you last time you did the Enormocast, which was that if you're a climber, you pretty much have to do the Enormocast.
Yeah, no, I'll tell him. I bet he would, honestly. The thing is, you'd have to find a way to get it like scheduled through his, you know, publicist or team or whatever. But like if it was just on 100%. His calendar, he'd be like, yeah, cool, this is fun. Like he would love just chatting about climbing for an hour or two. You know, but
that would be super cool.
But that's always the crux, is like getting it onto the calendar or whatever, because he's like, oh yeah, I'm sure there must be time eventually in between shooting this movie and that movie and this crazy thing I've going on and this other thing and my family and my kids. And, you know, it's like, I don't know, at a certain point, and I'm experiencing this a little bit. You sort of lose control of your own calendar because like other people are just like putting stuff on there and doing stuff with it, and so then you just wind up like doing whatever people tell you to. But if someone told him to do the Enormocast, he'd be great.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. Actually, Mark kind of sort of teased it a little bit, but yeah, I don't know how to get through that wall, but yeah. Anyway, back to you. Let's wrap this thing up.
Tell Chris Sharma to put it on there.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, are you friends with Chris? Because I feel like Chris could do it.
I haven't been able to lock that guy down.
Dude,
either.
You've never done an Enormocast with Chris?
No. He's like a wily.
Is he?
Well, he just is like one of those dudes that's like, yeah, man, and then when
that's
it comes
the same
to
thing.
actually like getting it,
Totally.
getting it on the calendar, but it's the opposite problem to where his calendar is so open that he's like,
no, I think his calendar is pretty full now. I mean, he's like running 2 gyms and 2 kids, and dealing with family.
Well, yeah,
and stuff.
that sort of stuff, but yeah. Getting him to like be on a mic at a certain time of day,
totally. Well, especially with the Euro time change stuff, it's all kind of cruxy.
Yeah,
but
but I haven't actually put a strong effort into it lately, so maybe it's time.
Dude, having him on Climbing Gold was like such a pleasure. And then after the episode came out, he sent me a text. It was like, dude, thanks for making me look like a hero. I was like, dude, you're the Chris Sharma. It doesn't take very much. Yeah. It's like it's pretty easy to make you look like a hero because you freaking are.
Yeah, it's funny because the Enormocast is riddled with Chris Sharma stories from other people. Yeah, like Will Gadd and stuff. But yeah, never heard from the man. I know it's weird. There's a few holes. Steve House is a big hole in the resume as well. He's also been really wily.
Oh yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah, so I appreciate you not being wily.
Yeah, well, that's because you have my phone number, so you just send me a text and I'm just like, yeah, I guess I'll do that thing. That's fun. That's cool.
Yeah, but it's funny because I feel like I have a somewhat empathy of what your time is like now, and so it's I'm not just gonna like be in your ear or on your case all the time because I do want to respect your time to climb and your time to have a career and stuff like that. So I do really appreciate you coming on the show and making time for something like the Enormocast and to talk to your peoples. The climbers are here, man, and they've loved you for years and kind of contributed to who you are in a big way that, we're still here wanting you to do good.
No, that's exactly the thing is I kind of love speaking to core, like pure climbing audiences when I get to, because like for all the times that I do Good Morning America or something weird like that and have to explain that there's a difference between free climbing and free soloing, I'm like, oh, it's such a pleasure to just go deep into pure climbing. I'm like, oh, I mean, doing something like the Enormocast is so fun, compared to doing corporate speaking or doing mainstream media. So I'm like, oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to my peers,
So one last question. Are you ever scared?
Yeah, exactly. Like, dude, I did an interview recently about Climbing Gold. Technically it was like PR for Climbing Gold stuff.
Sure.
But literally like the mic turned on and the guy was like, what's it like to freestyle? And I was like, what? I was like, oh man, he might not have said freestyle, but it was like freehand or like free whatever. And I was I was like, God damn, and it was like 8 a.m. or something. I like just gotten up to like do this thing, and I was like, okay, time to like flip the switch and like be engaging and be articulate and be like, well, so the thing you're talking about is actually called free soloing, which is climbing with your hands and your feet, and no rope to protect you.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Alex for making time for that so enthusiastically. He was incredibly easy to book, actually, which is awesome. Not everybody is. Not everybody even returns my emails or my texts, but Alex was right on top of it, so appreciate that. And I want to point something out is that the rise in Alex Honnold's fortunes have actually paralleled almost exactly the rise in the fortunes of the Enormocast. I mean, minus the Oscar. I'll give him that. But I don't think that's a coincidence. I think Alex owes the Enormocast a lot more than he thinks. And you heard him. He was already trying to book a 4th appearance. Like, come on, dude, let's just relax. We'll get to it. We'll see what else you do, all right? Anyhow, thanks again to Alex. Yeah, the pandemic. It's going out the door for a lot of parts of the country. Let's hope it stays out the door and people don't act too crazy out there. Take it easy, ease back into it all. We got the rest of our lives. Luckily for most of us, sadly not for everyone. You made it through. Don't fuck up now. Be careful and watch out for each other. We don't know what the lingering psychological damage of this whole thing is. So watch out for each other. Give each other space, to use that word that's so popular right now. They don't want to quite ease out the door yet, you know. Nudge. Don't yank them out the door. And be careful out there climbing. Watch out for each other. Be cool. Memorial Day weekend. Your crag is going to be packed with people. Deal with it. Be kind. And check your knots.
Do you know who I am?
No, I can't say that I do.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
Really?
People know me.
Well, I'm very happy for you.
I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books, and my apartment smells of rich mahogany.